What's up, everybody? Welcome in. It's Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast. I had a couple days off. I'm back, ready and refreshed. Phil continues to work indefatigably, covering all aspects of the New England Patriots. He's boots on the ground at the Combine. Phil, how are you?
Literal boots on the ground. I happen to be wearing boots today. It's about 60 degrees. It's a beautiful day here. There's already plenty going on.
All right. Well, we want to vomit you out into the streets of Indianapolis to make sure that you cover everything. I will make a note of weather. The missus and I went down to Nashville, hoping last Wednesday, just a brief visit, that we would enjoy the same 70-degree temperatures that we were experiencing in New England on that Wednesday. When we got there, no, it was 35, and rained like, well, it peed rain on us on the first day. So despite that, I feel really refreshed. We had a great time, and I'm back and ready to get at it. And Phil, you did a great job last week talking to J.C. Jackson, who clearly wants to get paid and clearly ought to get paid. Undrafted guy. He's got 17 interceptions over the last 2 years, 23 pass breakups. My question is, and we're going to get into the level of play of J.C. Jackson, what exactly he is. Is he really good? Is he a ball hawk, or is he a shutdown elite corner? But for the Patriots' purposes, is J.C. Jackson a luxury item at $17 million per year, whether it's franchised or in a long-term deal?
Boy, $17 million a year, you've got to be more than a luxury item. I think in today's NFL, Tom, you could make the argument that having a number one corner is a luxury item.
That's what I mean.
It just hasn't been proven that you need that to get to the promised land. And, you know, that's been the case for the Patriots, right? The Patriots have had a lot of success with number one corners. But if you just look at this past year's postseason, I know the Rams had a number one corner, but he wasn't a shutdown guy in that Super Bowl. Jamar Chase put up some numbers on him. And really the latter portion of that season, he had gotten a few times. That Bucs game, Brady was attacking Jalen Ramsey and scoring a touchdown late in that game to make it a game. So you look at the Bengals, you look at the Bucs themselves, look at the Bills, look at the Chiefs. You know, the Bills have Tre'Davious White, but he didn't play the whole second half of the season. So I just don't think you need it, Tom, but you need to be really good elsewhere. You need to have a good pass rush. You need to have a really good offense. So are the Patriots there where they can afford to say, yeah, we're good in the secondary. We've got a young quarterback and a dynamic offense, and we've got these pass rushers that are going to be great? I don't think so, but that $17 million price tag is a really difficult one to swallow because it just is going to limit you this offseason in terms of the moves you can make.
And that's what I mean when I say luxury item, because when you are starting out, as any young family would understand, you need to have the staples. You need to drive sensible cars. You need to take staycations. You need to keep things stable. The Patriots were spendthrifts last year. They had to be because they had drafted poorly in previous years, so they had to buy a team. They did so. To turn around the next year and spend $17 million on a cornerback when your team is still, you and I have this conversation frequently, but building towards something that is going to be better than it is in 2021 and 2022. I look at that, it's going to cuff you a little bit. You know, wouldn't you like to have 3 $6 million players instead of one $17 million player? And when we talk about the Patriots always having had success with the number one, whether it's Ty Law, Asante Samuel, brief respite, back at it again with Aqib Talib, then Darrelle Revis, then Malcolm Butler, then Gilmore, then J.C. Jackson. Those have been their, what you would call ones, Pro Bowl level ones. The only time they didn't have that was post Asante Samuel, 08, 9, 10, 11, and into 12. And how much success did they have then? Not a lot. But how good was the team? That's the thing, is the Patriots have to evaluate how good are we right now. You have to have Stephon Gilmore for the latter years of Tom Brady, right? He'll clinch you a Super Bowl. He'll make the defense capable. You don't have to worry about the offense. So the upshot of it is, for me, you're still a building team. If you're a corner away and you figure you're going to be in these massive games of import against teams you have to stop, yeah, $17 million is good for a player. But if we look at the 3 games that J.C. Jackson performed against the Buffalo Bills, He was targeted 22 times in 3 games. That's not shying away from him. There were 12 receptions on him for 198 yards and a touchdown. In the playoff game, and everybody got lit up, but in the playoff game, he allowed 5 catches on 6 targets for 98 yards. He played well against Stephon Diggs on plenty of plays. But Stephon Diggs also cooked him on some critical plays. That to me is not a guy who you say, I can't go near him. He's a no-fly zone.
No, and I don't think teams necessarily look at him that way. I do find it interesting that there's this difficult balance that I think everyone is trying to figure out in terms of how much of creating turnovers is a innate skill and how much of it is pretty volatile and difficult to predict, and the result of a bounce going one way or another. And his interception numbers are so consistently good across the board that I think you have to look at it and say, man, this guy is just playing better than everyone else or most others when it comes to turning the football over. How much is that worth is the question. And we know Bill Belichick tells us all the time, turnovers after points determines who wins and loses games more than anything else. And so, if he were to kind of hold himself to that credo, maybe he would pay JC Jackson. I'm finding it hard to believe that he will go that way, Tom, because even if, and I know the cap can be moved in a million different ways, but we've both written about this and I've got into the numbers a little bit. Even if they pull every lever and push every button in terms of creating cap space this offseason, and they tag JC Jackson and they're willing to play him on the $17 million tag, and then they set aside some money for next year and they pay Jacoby Myers, you've got about, I don't know, $15 million to just play with, just to bring some other guys back that you might need on your roster next year, whether it's
there's a few of them,
Ted
right?
Karras or Devin McCourty or, Nick Folk, Brian Hoyer. Like these are not big money players and big ticket items this offseason, but you add them all up, they're all going to have cap hits that are between 1 and, I don't know, $3-4 million. And then that money kind of goes up in smoke and you've essentially just brought back the team that you had last year. And so that to me is the argument against keeping JC Jackson on the tag. And I think in order to keep him, Tom, you do have to tag him, because to me, he's not going to agree to a long-term deal before he gets to free agency, unless he has to, because he's on the tag and he can't negotiate with anybody else. And
you're not going to escape it. There've been years past where, whether it's Dante Hightower or Devin McCourty or players, and McCourty's not a great example, but players who said, go find out what's out there, come back to us, and we'll talk about what that is, and we'll see what we can do. You can't do that with JC Jackson, because once he gets out there, he's going to hear $90 million over 5 years from somebody, however you divvy it up. It's exactly like a Trey Flowers situation. It's exactly like a Malcolm Butler situation, except the Patriots and the Malcolm Butler situation had someone behind him. So if JC Jackson hits the market unfettered, he's pretty much gone. And the practical question is, how screwed are the Patriots if they are? I had a Twitter guy yesterday say to me, after I put out a poll, of course they have to. What are they going to do? Go out there with Joanne Williams and Jalen Mills? Well, no, there's a player acquisition period that's coming up. Phil's at the combine for that. Free agency will begin. They will bring someone in. You never go from the player that's there to zero. You have a replacement player who approximates the level of play that the guy left brought with him. What are you going to lose when JC Jackson goes? Phil, look at the story I did. I found a YouTube clip of 24 of JC Jackson's 25 picks. When you lose him, you are going to lose a guy who's a ball hawk, who makes downfield plays by high pointing the ball, who also has great anticipation in being able to swoop in underneath plays when he's the second man in. And he also walls off beautifully along the sideline and creates turnovers that way. He creates a ton of picks on which you go, what was the quarterback thinking about? He was never open. And that's because I think he's underestimated. But you can get another underestimated corner. The Patriots have done it before, haven't they?
Yeah, Tom, or lightly regarded, right? All these undrafted guys that they have plucked and turned into real players. It's the ones that they actually draft highly that they've had the issues with, right?
Yeah.
Cyrus Jones or Duke Dawson or Juwan Williams. But there's some really good corner talent in this year's draft class. There are some other capable starting caliber corners in this year's free agency class, whether it's Carlton Davis from Tampa Bay or Trevarius Ward from Kansas City, who was essentially their top guy. He's not a Pro Bowl caliber player, but they got by with that guy, again, in part because of what they had offensively and the other pieces they had around them. You mentioned a name, Tom, earlier that I'm starting to think more and more is a good comp for this JC Jackson situation. And it's Trey Flowers. And Flowers was somebody, same deal, right? The Patriots, it felt like hadn't had a pass rush since they got rid of Chandler Jones. And Trey Flowers comes along and he is this dynamic guy and they can use him inside and outside and the players love him and he's nose to the grindstone and he is the ultimate draft and develop. And these are the kinds of guys you want to reward. And they just let him go. No tag and trade, no nothing. Get a comp pick back. And he ends up signing a market setting deal essentially for the Lions. I could see it playing out similarly here. The big difference though is when they let Trey Flowers walk after the 2018 season, helps them win a Super Bowl, second time where he's arguably their best defensive player, and they win the Super Bowl. When they let him walk, their secondary was stacked. Mm-hmm. So they could look at it and say, well, we lose a pass rusher, but we've got the best corner in football. Stephon Gilmore goes on to win the Defensive Player of the Year award next year. And they had JC Jackson going into his second season, and they still had Jason McCourty. And like they were fine on the back end. This year, can you look at the pass rush and say the same thing? Can you say, well, we'll lose JC Jackson, but we've got Christian Barmore, who's, I'm not saying this, but best case, Bill Belichick's looking at it saying, well, this guy's Richard Seymour reincarnate. Mm-hmm. And we've got Matt Judon, who's a freak. And if he doesn't get a little bit banged up at the end of the year, he ends up with 15 sacks. So we'll be fine. Do you think that's how he's looking at it right now?
I think that you're closer on the front seven than in the back four because of turnover in the back end. Patrick Chung's significant. Devin McCourty, as you pointed out yesterday, is a free agent. You lose J.C. Jackson and Stephon Gilmore in back-to-back in within months of each other. That's, again, a massive outflow. Is Jalen Mills a nice player, and did he overachieve? Yep, he did. Miles Bryant, you're not going to build a secondary around him. Kyle Duggar, those are the players. He is the kind of player that Gerard Mayo was referring to when he said your best players have to step up and be leaders. It's the exact kind of player. But I think the front seven can make up for back end deficiencies by continuing to get better in the pass rush. Speed them up. You're not going to cover all these guys. You're not going to cover Emmanuel Sanders and Stephon Diggs and, who's the running back leaking out there, the little Singletary,
right?
Dawson Knox. So get fast up front. And then when you do that, Josh Allen's going to run around you. All right. Here's the last thing I'll say as we're talking about this. This is a team that didn't force a punt in either game against the Bills. And you got me over here presenting the case for letting their most productive back-end defender go when Devin McCourty's up. And Dante Hightower, I know that he didn't have a great year, but he's also going to go. And you have this ambiguity on the defensive side. The Patriots have a lot of work to do to be a better team in 2022 than they were in 2021. Because so far in this offseason, between leaving coaches and expiring contracts, they're doing nothing but getting worse. It's the nature of the business, but they're taking a lot of hits. Let's talk about the receiver position, though, because you're at the combine, and that's a place where they could get better. Who are your eyeballs fixated on the next few days? How good is this receiver class, I guess, is the first question.
It's a good class, and it's feeling like you could say that about every class because there's just so many receivers every single year because that's where the best athletes tend to flock at the early stages of their careers. And I know there are evaluators that are looking at it saying, man, imagine if some of these guys had just decided to be corners at some point in time. Because corners are really hard to find, although there's some good corner talent in this year's draft too. Receivers, again, very deep. And I'm writing a story right now about how the Patriots can just get faster. And I'm highlighting a few positions, corner and receiver, one of them, linebackers, another. Just talking to some NFL evaluators last week here in Indianapolis as well, kind of getting ready for the workouts, which don't happen until a little bit later this week. There are a few guys in the first round that are going to fly, that are already expected to be first round picks that may just work their way up the board steadily, depending on just how good they are at the combine. But Treylon Burks, big, fast, powerful, 6'3", 225. He's going to run for somebody that size. I think he's going to run in like the mid 4.4s, maybe even a little bit lower than that. We'll see. So
we feeling a DK Metcalf vibe out of him?
He has a little bit of that. And it's not just because of the straight line speed. It's because the quickness drills may not be so hot either, which was the case with DK Metcalf when he was coming out. He turned like a semi in the 3-cone and people lost their minds, and he fell all the way to the second round. And now we see what he can do in the league, but he has a little bit of a similar profile.
Yeah. 7 is like an alligator. They don't turn well.
And, so that's one. There's I would say there's a couple of other smaller guys at receiver that are small enough. I wonder if Bill Belichick would be willing to invest a first round pick in them. But they're also really talented. And one is Chris Olave, who I had the Patriots taken in a recent 7-round mock on NBC Sports Boston.com. Ohio State, if you've watched any college football at all, you've watched this guy, is probably going to run in the 4.3s, but is also maybe the best route runner in this year's class. So you could send him deep. I think they could use him really anywhere on the field. So if you want a dynamic slot, you could probably put him in there. He's about 6 feet, 190. So, he's not huge. He's just watching him. He's a little thin, and he's not a big after the catch kind of player. So if you want to be the short to intermediate passing game and let your playmakers make plays with the ball in their hands, Burks can do that. Olave, I don't know if he's going to be as dynamic after the catch. Another name is Jahan Dotson from Penn State. Again, a little bit undersized. I think he'll probably check in even a little bit under 6 feet in the 180s. But there's another guy that people are saying he's going to roll. Like, he's going to run in the 4.3s, and he's going to jump out the gym, and he's going to be really impressive on the shuttle stuff as well. So you could see him come away with almost a Deion Branch kind of combine, where Branch wasn't even, I don't think was that straight line fast, but he had some of the shuttle drills and the 3-cone stuff. He was incredibly quick. So Dotson is another first round potential guy that I've got my eye on that I think could really help the Patriots. Give them some juice.
They need some juice, because when you do look at this team and you look at the suddenness of their players, again, Kendrick Bourne is probably their most sudden player in terms of dynamic. Put the ball in his hands, just make him create something. It wasn't that long ago when you had Dion Lewis and Julian Edelman and Brandon Cooks and. So the speed on offense, while Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson, Jonnu Smith, and Hunter Henry are good cogs, and Kendrick Bourne too. I'm not putting Jacoby Myers in that group for a reason. He's not a sudden player who's going to make a whole mess of people miss. His strength is elsewhere, but they need to find a water bug. It's that simple. They need a water bug. They need somebody who can make people miss. Danny Amendola made people miss in small area. So those are key. Last thing I want to hit, though, relative to this week for the Patriots at the Combine, they don't have a big staff. Mike Reese did a nice job for ESPN.com highlighting the role of Matt Groh as he elevates and now kind of takes over the personnel department. He's at the head. Elliott Wolf's behind him. There was a collaboration last year in which it was, Bill, Ziegler, Groh, Wolf. Previously, it had always been Bill and Caserio, and then all those guys coming up behind them. But you have that shortage. Also, on the offensive side of the ball, you don't have your normal offensive line coach. Coaches are often there at the Combine, in my experience, Phil, yes?
They are often there, though I know the Patriots are not sending all of their coaches. So We'll see how many actually end up getting here. It's still relatively early. Tuesday morning is a little bit early in the week, but if you're an offensive coach and you're coming, you should be here because the receivers just arrived and the quarterbacks just arrived. Not the Patriots will be interested in those guys, but saw some coaches last night.
It's a shit ton of work. It's an absolute shit ton of work and not a lot of manpower you're throwing at it. And a fair amount of the manpower you're throwing at it. I look at the Joe Judge and Matt Patricia. I'm sure they're going to be there. And like, what's the role? How I'm sure Bill will have their marching orders. He's a very organized individual, but it's just a lot of work. And I think that they're bobbing on the sea of, okay, how are we attacking 2022 as a personnel department, as a coaching staff? And then let's fill these holes. It's ambiguous, I guess.
I can just tell you, Tom, from talking to some people here, some folks around the league, people are flabbergasted at how this Patriots staff has come together. And it's focused on that offensive side specifically and what they're going to do in terms of coaching the quarterback and calling the plays. And there is clearly a lot of respect for Bill Belichick. And there is somewhat of a sense of, well, it's Bill and he'll figure it out and they'll figure it out. But the qualifications of some of the guys, Joe Judge specifically, but Matt Patricia too, and the jobs that it sounds like that they're going to be in, coaching quarterbacks and coaching offensive line. And I say it sounds like because that's what's been reported. You know, that this is Albert Breer has suggested this. Joe Judge could be working with quarterbacks, Matt Patricia with the offensive line. My understanding is that the coaches themselves were going to be talking a little bit more about roles for 2022 this week.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's how it shakes out, there's a lot of eyebrows raised here in Indianapolis. I'll say that. And I think part of it too is the willingness maybe on the Patriots end to reach out to folks who might have made sense in a role like offensive coordinator to help replace Josh McDaniels. For instance, my understanding that the Patriots did not reach out to somebody like Chad O'Shea. I think there's still a really good relationship there between Bill Belichick and Chad O'Shea, who has served as an offensive coordinator in the past and spent a ton of time here in New England. But that wasn't something, again, it's my understanding that was broached or really considered. So, or if it wasn't considered strongly enough that it turned into any sort of real conversation. So that's the vibe I'm getting so far, Tom. So I think your questions about the staff are legitimate. Even Dante Scarnecchia said last week, hey, if people are concerned about how this thing has come together, I get it, because it does look, you know, it's unusual. So the question is, you know, can these guys figure it out? Because it looks like this is what the staff is going to be. I, even as recently as last week, I said, I'm not sure. I would still hold out, you know, I would still wait, be patient. There is still technically time for them to add to the staff, because I know there were people who know much more than I do who were feeling that way.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm getting the sense that this kind of looks like it might be it, and we'll see how it goes.
What's the internal discussion in Bill Belichick's mind that makes him look on paper at this group and says, yeah, we're good with this? I mean, that's what leaves me dumbstruck sometimes. He goes, okay, you know what? We just lost Josh. And I've said that he's one of the most important coaches in the league. We lost Nick there, who's one of the most important personnel people or employees in the league. And Ziegler was good, and he's gone. But we got Matt back, and he just destroyed Detroit. But he's back, and Joe's back, and well, he never coached offense. Well, maybe we'll be fine. I just don't see how that happens unless there's just a level of confidence, which obviously would border on, depending upon the result, arrogance that is off the charts. I'll figure it out. Either I take my opponents so unseriously that I can just roll it out there with a skeleton crew and a bunch of guys who've never done these jobs before, or I take my ability as a head coach and team builder as being so superior that I can roll it out there with that. I mean, Jimmy Johnson and Bill Belichick have talked on their boat ride every spring, and Jimmy Johnson has made it clear to him. And I was with a coterie of coaches a few years ago at the NFL owners meetings. McVay, Vrabel, Doug Marrone at the time, a number of different coaches who around the AFC and the NFL, and they were talking about the laptops, the tablets that were being used on the sideline. And I think it was McVay who was saying, look, this is good for us. We're going to be able to figure this out. 90% of the league is too dumb to get it right. And Jimmy Johnson used to talk about on the boat, all but about 10 teams can eliminate themselves at the beginning of the year because they're too stupid. And that is 100% true in some cases, but also a mindset that the Patriots have. We'll be fine because we're smarter than everybody else. We're not going to do the same stupid shit that they do. Do you have to push it this far, though? Do you have to put yourself on this big a stagger?
Well, he's just clearly so, I would, maybe enamored by the abilities of Patricia and Judge, that he feels like they can handle it. I was trying to think back if there's ever been a situation like this one before. And the one that first came to mind was Caserio, when Caserio became the receivers coach in 2007, I think it was, right? But that was 2007 when you had Randy Moss,
right,
and Wes Welker and Tom Brady at the height of his powers. And it was the receiver spot, which is important, no doubt, but it's not quarterback. And it's not quarterback when the quarterback's in his second year and he's still trying to figure it out. And you have all these pieces that are new moving in and out and trying to figure out this offense and figure out how to best fit together. So that to me is the issue. If it was a different situation, if Tom Brady was still here, right, and Joe Judge became quarterback's coach,
it'd be fine.
People would shrug their shoulders. It's just the situation that they are specifically in with this team and with Mac Jones that makes it a concern.
And I think if in 2002, Charlie Weiss wanted to leave, Bill would have lost his mind and made sure he wouldn't, because it was too important. All right, Phil, you got to get your boots, not just on the ground, but on the pavement, walking to wherever it is, the convention center, and making things happen out there. I'd like to say I missed the combine. I don't miss the combine. Went to a lot of combines. It would wear me down to a nub. I'd come back as sawdust. Long days, long nights. But we will see you at 6 o'clock on Early Edition on this particular Tuesday, I'm sure.
Bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
All right, buddy. Thanks a lot. Enjoy. Keep us all posted. Everybody, we'll talk to you on Thursday.